The Andromeda Collective had always prided itself on being a thoroughly civilized organization. Sure, they'd glassed 17 star systems in the past century, but those were administrative necessities, nothing personal, merely the natural order of things when lesser species failed to appreciate the benefits of voluntary subjugation. The fact that voluntary often required a demonstration involving antimatter torpedoes was simply a testament to how stubborn some civilizations could be, which made the current situation so delightfully perplexing. Admiral Yexthul of the Hegemony Navy stared at the holographic display with the kind of expression typically reserved for discovering one's morning protein paste had developed sentience. The data streams cascaded in neat, orderly rows, each number a small monument to military futility. 43 different conquest attempts, 17 separate invasion fleets, 8 collaborative efforts involving multiple species, all targeting the same insignificant blue-green marble orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. 0 successes, perhaps, suggested Commander Blickstar from across the war room, his tentacles nervously adjusting the atmospheric controls. We're approaching this incorrectly. The humans might have some sort of cloaking technology for their defensive installations. Yexthul's secondary throat sac inflated with what could charitably be called amusement. Cloaking technology that renders an entire planetary defense grid invisible to sensors developed by 17 different species across 4 millennia of technological evolution. How wonderfully convenient for them. The truth was considerably more irritating. Every reconnaissance drone, every long-range sensor sweep returned the same baffling data. One moderately populated human colony world. Agricultural settlements scattered across 3 continents. No orbital defense platforms. No planetary shield. No weapons arrays capable of threatening so much as a cargo freighter, let alone a battle cruiser. The place looked about as militarily significant as a bowl of fermented grain paste. Yet somehow, every fleet that approached with conquest in mind experienced what the more poetically inclined species euphemistically termed catastrophic existence failure. The less poetic ones simply called it getting atomized before they could fire a shot, which had the advantage of accuracy if not elegance. General Korthnax of the Crimson Dominion had been particularly confident about his chance. His armada boasted 4,000 warships, each equipped with enough firepower to crack continents. He'd even brought specialized atmospheric processors to speed up the terraforming process once the irritating human problem had been resolved. The Dominion's intelligence networks had identified exactly 3 orbital installations around the target world, all of them clearly civilian communication relays. The general's confidence had lasted approximately 14 minutes into his assault. That was how long it took for his entire fleet to become an expanding cloud of superheated particles, with one notable exception. His command ship's escape pod, which had been thoughtfully ejected moments before the flagship joined its companions in achieving a higher state of atomic dispersal. When recovered by a passing merchant vessel, the general had been found in a catatonic state, repeatedly mumbling something about impossible geometries and the mathematics don't work that way. He'd since taken up interpretive dance as therapy, though his performances tended to focus heavily on themes of existential dread. The Crystalline Collective had tried next, approaching with their characteristic methodical precision. They'd spent 6 months conducting detailed probability analyses, factoring in every conceivable variable from solar weather patterns to the migration habits of local fauna. Their conclusion had been mathematically inevitable: successful conquest within 72 hours, with a 94.7% probability of minimal collateral damage. 14 hours later, their beautiful geometric warships had been reduced to their component atoms, with what the survivors described as distressing efficiency. The collective's response had been to retreat to their home system and spend the next 3 years recalibrating their probability matrices. They'd recently announced that mathematics itself might be fundamentally broken, and were considering switching to interpretive philosophy as a more reliable analytical framework. But perhaps the most telling incident involved the Void Syndicate, a collection of species so thoroughly unpleasant that even the war crimes tribunals had stopped bothering with formal charges. They'd approached the human world with their typical subtlety, broadcasting their intentions to harvest the orbital meat sacks for spare parts across all frequency. Their fleet had consisted of converted asteroid miners, equipped with industrial-grade dismantling equipment, the kind used for breaking down entire moons. They'd lasted 9 minutes. When the debris field was eventually analyzed, forensic specialists discovered that each ship had been disassembled with surgical precision, every component separated and sorted with the kind of methodical care typically associated with fine craftsmanship. The syndicate's survivors had been found floating in perfectly arranged geometric patterns, alive but thoroughly traumatized, each one clutching a small handwritten note, reading "Please reconsider your life choices," in 17 different languages. The notes had been written on authentic Earth-grown paper stock. Now, as representatives from 47 different species gathered in the collective's primary conference facility, the questions had evolved beyond simple military logistics. This wasn't about conquest anymore. This was about understanding how a species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel could consistently humiliate civilizations that had been perfecting the art of warfare since before humans had discovered fire. The conference chamber itself was a marvel of diplomatic engineering, designed to accommodate the wildly varied physiological needs of its occupants. Atmospheric zones shifted seamlessly between methane-rich and oxygen-heavy environments. Gravity fields adjusted in real time to prevent the silicon-based delegates from accidentally crushing their carbon-based colleagues. Temperature controls maintained precise thermal zones to keep everyone from either freezing solid or spontaneously combusting. Despite these accommodations, the mood was uniformly grim. Pride was at stake here, and for species that measured their worth in conquered star systems, the continued independence of one small human colony represented a cosmic-scale embarrassment. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Fluxara, of the Nebula States, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lighting into prismatic rainbows, we should consider negotiation rather than conquest. The suggestion was met with the kind of silence typically reserved for funerals or particularly awkward family gatherings. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their various forms of seating arrangement. The concept of negotiating with a species they'd collectively dismissed as barely evolved primates was about as appealing as voluntarily ingesting poisonous substances. Yet there was a certain logic to the proposal. After all, direct military action had proven spectacularly ineffective. Perhaps it was time to try something radically different, actually talking to the humans rather than simply attempting to vaporize them. The decision to dispatch a diplomatic envoy was reached after 17 hours of debate, 3 minor physical altercations, and 1 incident involving a crystalline collective representative accidentally photosynthesizing a hegemony admiral's tentacle. The message would be simple: explain exactly how they'd managed to achieve such devastating defensive capabilities, and perhaps a mutually beneficial arrangement could be reached. What none of them expected was for the humans to respond with an invitation. Honored representatives of the galactic community, the transmission had begun, the human female's voice carrying an undertone of amusement that translated poorly across species barriers. We would be delighted to meet with your delegation. Please feel free to visit at your convenience. We'll have refreshments prepared. The casual tone had been almost insulting. Here were civilizations that could sterilize solar systems discussing surrender terms, and the humans were offering snacks. But perhaps most unsettling of all had been the closing line of the message. "Oh, and please don't bring any warships. They make him nervous, and nobody wants that." The diplomatic vessel Harmonious Convergence was, by galactic standards, a masterpiece of non-threatening design. Its hull curved in gentle, aesthetically pleasing arcs that suggested artistic merit, rather than military capability. The weapons arrays had been replaced with cultural exchange modules. Even the navigation deflectors had been painted in soothing pastels to convey peaceful intention, none of which explained why Admiral Yexthul felt like he was piloting his own funeral barge. The human colony world hung before them in the main viewer, looking disappointingly normal. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in predictable weather patterns. No ominous energy signatures, no massive orbital constructs bristling with exotic weaponry, no reality-warping anomalies that might explain how this unremarkable ball of rock had become the graveyard of countless military ambition. "Incoming transmission from the surface," reported Lieutenant Grixdel, his voice carefully neutral in the way of professionals trying not to panic. "They're welcoming us to their world, and asking if we'd prefer the scenic approach or the direct route." The scenic approach. Yexthul's head crest flattened against his skull. Involuntary display of confusion. "Are they offering us a tourism package?" Before anyone could formulate an appropriate response, the main screen shifted to show the interior of what appeared to be a civilian conference facility. The room was decorated in the understated elegance favored by species that had moved beyond the need to demonstrate their power. Through ostentatious displays, natural wood panels lined the walls, real plants, actual living vegetation, not holographic approximations, provided gentle green accents. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of calm professionalism. Sitting behind a curved desk that seemed designed more for comfort than intimidation, was a human female. She appeared to be in her middle years by the standards of her species, with the kind of composed expression that suggested she'd spent considerable time dealing with difficult people. Her clothing was simple but well-tailored, projecting competence without arrogance. Standing beside her, almost forgotten in his stillness, was a human male. If the female projected competence, the male projected nothing. He was so thoroughly unremarkable that the eye seemed to slide past him without gaining purchase. Medium height, medium build, medium coloring. The kind of person who could disappear in a crowd of three. His clothing was equally nondescript. Simple dark pants, a plain shirt, boots that suggested utility rather than fashion. Yet something about his presence made Admiral Yexthal's primary stomach churn with unease. "Welcome to our world," the female said, her voice carrying that same hint of amusement from the original transmission. "I trust your journey was pleasant. We've prepared refreshments, though I understand dietary requirements can vary considerably across species." The Admiral found himself staring at the screen, trying to process the cognitive dissonance. Here were representatives of 47 different civilizations, armed with ultimatums that could reshape the political landscape of the galaxy, being offered what amounted to a social gathering. That is to say, the assembled representatives of the Galactic Collective have come to discuss terms. He managed, falling back on the diplomatic protocols that had been hammered out during 17 hours of heated debate. "Terms?" The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "How interesting. What sort of terms did you have in mind?" Commander Blickstar leaned forward, his tentacles writhing with barely contained agitation. "The terms of your surrender, obviously. You cannot continue to resist the will of the galactic community indefinitely. We represent military forces numbering in the millions of vessels. Surely you must recognize the futility of your situation." The woman tilted her head thoughtfully, as if considering a particularly interesting philosophical proposition. "I see. And if we decline to surrender, what then?" "Then we will be forced to demonstrate the consequences of defying civilizations that have been perfecting warfare since before your species developed written language." General Korthnax interjected, his rehabilitation from interpretive dance apparently having restored some of his military bravado. The male human shifted slightly, a movement so subtle it barely registered on the optical sensor. Yet somehow every military officer on the bridge felt their survival instincts suddenly scream warnings they couldn't quite articulate. "Oh dear," the woman said softly, glancing at her companion. "They're making threats again." The male human's expression didn't change. He simply looked at the view screen with the kind of mild attention one might give to mildly interesting weather patterns. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and utterly without inflection. "How many The question hung in the air for a moment, seeming to carry more weight than its simple phrasing should have allowed. Excuse me?" Admiral Yexthal found himself responding automatically. "How many ships are you planning to bring?" The male clarified, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than concern. "For the demonstration, I mean. I like to know these things in advance. Helps with the planning." Ambassador Flexara's crystalline form shifted through several colors before settling on a particularly agitated shade of amber. Are you asking for intelligence about our military capabilities? Do you expect us to simply provide you with tactical data?" "Not particularly, no." The male human shrugged with the kind of casual indifference that somehow managed to be more unsettling than any threat could have been. "I was just curious. It doesn't really matter in the long run." The woman smiled, and there was something distinctly predatory about the expression. "You'll have to forgive him. He's not much for small talk. But he's very good at his job." "And what precisely is his job?" General Korthnax demanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had once commanded fleets across star systems. The woman's smile widened slightly. "Oh, a little bit of everything, really. Quality control mostly. He ensures that visitors to our world have a memorable experience.
Lieutenant Grextall was frantically consulting his cultural database, trying to decode the layers of meaning in the human conversation. Admiral, I'm detecting elevated stress indicators across all departments. Recommend we maintain standard diplomatic protocols. But Admiral Yexthul was no longer listening to his crew. His attention was fixed entirely on the male human, who had begun to examine his fingernails with the kind of casual attention that suggested profound boredom. There was something fundamentally wrong about the scene, something that violated every instinct Yexthul had developed during decades of military service. Predators in his experience announced themselves. They displayed their strength, demonstrated their capabilities, established dominance through obvious means. This human displayed nothing. He simply existed, occupying space with the quiet confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with appropriate application of force. We're prepared to offer very reasonable terms, the woman continued, apparently oblivious to the growing tension on the bridge. Complete autonomy for our world, recognition of our territorial sovereignty, and a mutual non-aggression pact. In exchange, we promise not to expand beyond our current system, and to continue ignoring your various military activities elsewhere in the galaxy. The terms were so reasonable they were insulting. Here was a single colony world, facing the combined might of nearly 50 different civilizations, offering to negotiate from a position of apparent strength. The sheer audacity of it defied rational analysis. And if we refuse these terms? Commander Blickstar asked, though his tentacles had gone rigid with what his species typically displayed during extreme stress. The woman glanced at her companion, who looked up from his fingernails with the kind of mild interest one might show a particularly dull documentary. Well, she said thoughtfully, I suppose that would depend on how you define refuse. Are we talking about polite decline followed by withdrawal, or are we discussing the more traditional approach involving large numbers of warships and unpleasant ultimatums? The latter, General Korthnek said grimly. The male human sighed, a sound that somehow conveyed vast depths of professional resignation. Right then, how long do you need to get your fleets organized? The question was asked with the same tone one might use to inquire about dinner preferences or meeting schedules, as if the systematic destruction of entire armadas was simply another item on his daily agenda, somewhere between morning coffee and afternoon reports. You're asking us how long we need to prepare for war. Admiral Yexthul's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Well, yes, it seems only fair to give you adequate time to organize yourselves. I'd hate for this to be over too quickly. The human paused, considering. Though I should mention that I have other commitments this week. Would 3 days be sufficient?
3 days later, the assembled might of 47 civilizations hung in space around the human colony world, like a metallic constellation of impending doom. The fleet was magnificent in its diversity and terrifying in its scope. Crystalline collective vessels that resembled geometric art installations bristled alongside the organic curves of hegemony bioships. Void Syndicate asteroid miners, hastily retrofitted with military-grade weaponry, formed loose formations with the sleek predatory lines of Crimson Dominion dreadnoughts. Admiral Yexthul surveyed the tactical display with the satisfaction of a professional who had finally assembled the right tool for an impossible job. 4 million vessels. Enough firepower to crack planets, boil oceans and reduce continents to constituent atoms. The combined fleet represented the military evolution of dozens of species across millennia of technological development. Surely, this time would be different. The human colony world continued its rotation with sublime indifference to the assembled armada. No defensive screens powered up. No weapons platforms emerged from hidden installations. The orbital space remained conspicuously empty except for a handful of civilian communication satellites and what appeared to be a weather monitoring station. Incoming transmission from the surface, Lieutenant Grextall reported, his voice tight with the kind of professional calm that indicated barely controlled panic. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the same conference room from 3 days earlier. The woman sat behind her desk with the same composed expression, as if massive interstellar fleets were a regular occurrence barely worth noting. Beside her, the male human stood in his characteristic stillness, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the assembled armada with the mild interest of someone observing cloud formations. Punctual, the woman observed approvingly. I do appreciate professionalism, though I have to say, You've brought quite a lot more ships than I was expecting. General Korthnax's voice crackled across the communication channel, distorted by the sheer number of vessels broadcasting simultaneously. We gave you 3 days to reconsider. Have you reached a decision regarding our terms? Oh yes, we've discussed it thoroughly, she replied cheerfully. We've decided to decline, but thank you for the offer. It was very considerate. The silence that followed was the kind typically associated with the moment just before natural disaster. 4 million crew members across countless vessels found themselves staring at their screens, trying to process the casual dismissal of the largest military force ever assembled in this sector of the galaxy.
You
Decline. Ambassador Flexara's crystalline form shifted through several agitated colors.
You do understand what you're looking at, don't you?
This fleet represents more destructive capability than your entire species has ever witnessed. Oh, I'm sure it does, the woman agreed amicably. Very impressive, really. You must have spent considerable time organizing all this. She glanced at her companion. Someone was asking earlier why I never needed an army. The male human's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted subtly. When he spoke, his voice carried the same quiet tone as before, but now it seemed to resonate through the communication systems of 4 million vessels simultaneously. I am the army. For a moment, nothing happened. The words hung in space like a challenge to physics itself. Then reality began to demonstrate just how flexible its rules could be when properly motivated. It started with the outermost ships in the formation, the scouts and reconnaissance vessels that formed the fleet's early warning network. One moment they were broadcasting routine status reports. The next, they simply weren't. No explosions, no energy discharges, no dramatic displays of destruction. They simply ceased to exist, as if the universe had decided their presence was no longer required. The effect rippled inward through the fleet like a wave of systematic non-existence. Entire squadrons vanished between heartbeats. Battle cruisers that had dominated star systems for centuries became expanding clouds of fundamental particles. The crystalline collective's geometric masterpieces dissolved into component atoms with mathematical precision. On 1,000 command bridges, tactical officers stared at displays that showed impossible reading. Ships were disappearing faster than sensors could track, yet there were no weapons signatures, no energy patterns, no indication of what was causing the systematic annihilation of the greatest military force in galactic history. Admiral Yexthal watched his own tactical display with the fascination of someone witnessing the complete breakdown of everything he thought he understood about warfare. The numbers cascaded downward in neat, orderly columns. 4 million vessels, 3.8 million, 3.5 million. The destruction followed no logical pattern, no strategic priority. It was as if something was simply working its way through the fleet methodically, like a cosmic accountant balancing books. General Korthnax's voice carried across the comm channels, distorted by what might have been terror or might have been awe. How is this possible? The male human on the screen had moved slightly, though no one could quite say. He still stood beside the woman's desk, hands still clasped behind his back, expression still mildly attentive. Yet somehow his presence seemed to fill the view screen, as if reality had decided to focus all its attention on this one unremarkable figure. You asked for a demonstration, he said quietly. I'm demonstrating. 3 million vessels, 2.7 million. The numbers continued their relentless countdown while something that defied every principle of physics and military strategy systematically dismantled the combined might of 47 civilizations. Commander Blixtar's tentacles had gone completely rigid, a physiological response his species typically reserved for impending death. Admiral, recommend immediate withdrawal. Whatever this is, we cannot. His words were cut off as the harmonious convergence shuddered slightly, not from any external impact, but from the sudden absence of the 3 escort vessels that had been flanking their position. The destroyers had simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but empty space and the lingering impression that reality itself had developed a sense of housekeeping. On the view screen, the woman smiled with genuine warmth. I probably should have mentioned earlier, he gets a bit focused when he's working. Don't take it personally. He's really quite pleasant when he's not professionally engaged. 2 million vessels, 1.8 million. The impossible mathematics of destruction continued their steady progression while the male human stood motionless, apparently accomplishing through sheer existence what entire civilizations couldn't achieve with their most advanced weapon. The truly disturbing part wasn't the systematic annihilation of the largest military force in recorded galactic history. It was how utterly routine it appeared to be for the human male responsible for it. He stood there with the same mild attention one might give to filing paperwork or organizing a storage closet, occasionally glancing at something beyond the view screen's range, as if checking items off an invisible list. 1.2 million vessels. 900,000. 800,000. Admiral Yexthal found himself experiencing what his species' psychologists would later classify as existential recalibration syndrome, the mental condition that occurred when fundamental assumptions about reality proved to be embarrassingly incorrect. He'd spent his entire career studying military tactics, understanding fleet dynamics, mastering the intricate dance of large-scale warfare. None of it had prepared him for watching someone casually delete starships from existence while maintaining the demeanor of a bored civil servant. Admiral Lieutenant Grextel's voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. "Recommend we transmit our surrender before..." "Before what?" Yextel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Before he finishes demonstrating that everything we thought we knew about warfare is fundamentally irrelevant." 600,000 vessels. 500,000. The numbers continued their inexorable decline while something that shouldn't exist by any rational measure of physics continued to treat the combined military might of dozens of civilizations as a minor organizational challenge. On the view screen, the woman had poured herself what appeared to be tea from a ceramic pot. The casual domesticity of the action was somehow more unsettling than the systematic destruction happening around them. She took a delicate sip and smiled pleasantly at the camera. "I do hope you're not taking this too personally," she said conversationally. "He's really not trying to be dramatic about it. This is just how he works." General Korthnak's communication channel erupted with what sounded like 17 different languages being spoken simultaneously, none of them coherent. The general had apparently moved beyond interpretive dance and was exploring the artistic potential of linguistic breakdown as a response to incomprehensible trauma. 300,000 vessels. 200,000. Commander Blickstar had curled his tentacles into the defensive configuration his species adopted when facing imminent extinction. "This is impossible," he whispered. "One individual cannot possess this level of destructive capability. The energy requirements alone would exceed the output of entire star systems." "You're thinking about it wrong," the woman on the screen said gently, apparently having overheard the conversation through whatever impossible means her companion was using to dismantle their fleet. "You're assuming he's using energy. That's very traditional of you. 100,000 vessels. 50,000. 20,000. The male human paused in his work, turning slightly to address the view screen directly. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone explaining something obvious to people who should already understand it. "The universe," he said quietly, "is considerably more flexible than most species realize. You've spent millennia developing technology to work within what you perceive as physical laws. We've spent considerably less time learning to work with them directly. 10,000 vessels. 5,000. 3,000. Admiral Yexthal watched the tactical display show the final moments of the greatest military disaster in galactic history. A handful of ships remained, scattered like debris from some cosmic accident. His own vessel apparently spared by design rather than chance. A few other command ships, their crews no doubt experiencing the same existential crisis that had reduced General Korthnak to speaking in tongues. "The demonstration is complete," the male human announced with the satisfaction of someone finishing a particularly tedious but necessary task. "I trust this clarifies our position regarding territorial sovereignty." The silence that followed was absolute. 47 different civilizations, represented by the surviving command crews of what had once been a 4 million vessel armada, found themselves collectively speechless in the face of power that transcended their understanding of what was possible. The woman finished her tea, and set the cup down with a gentle clink that somehow carried clearly across all surviving communication channels. "Now then," she said brightly, "about those mutual non-aggression pacts we discussed earlier.
I believe the terms become considerably more attractive when viewed in proper context. Admiral Yexthal stared at the view screen, trying to process the cognitive whiplash of returning to diplomatic negotiations after witnessing the casual demolition of everything he'd thought he understood about military power. You're still offering to negotiate? Of course, the woman replied, looking genuinely puzzled by the question. Why wouldn't we? We're civilized beings after all. We prefer conversation to demonstrations. Though I should mention that future visits should probably be limited to diplomatic vessels. Large fleets make him nervous, and as you've seen, nobody wants that. The male human had returned to his characteristic stillness, hands clasped behind his back, expression mild and attentive. Looking at him now, Admiral Yexthal found it almost impossible to reconcile this unremarkable figure with the systematic destruction of 4 million warships. Yet the tactical displays didn't lie. The debris fields didn't lie. The growing stream of psychological casualty reports from surviving crew members didn't lie. The galaxy, the woman continued conversationally, is a large place with room for many different approaches to existence. We've found that mutual respect and appropriate boundaries tend to work better than traditional conquest models. Much more efficient, really, and considerably less paperwork. As the surviving vessels began their long journey home, carrying news that would fundamentally reshape galactic politics, Admiral Yexthal found himself pondering the profound irony of the situation. The most feared military force in known space turned out to be one human male, who treated interstellar warfare like a particularly boring household chore. The woman's final transmission followed them as they limped away from what would forever be remembered as the greatest military humiliation in galactic history. Do give our regards to your respective governments, and please, feel free to visit again anytime. We'll always have tea ready. In the years that followed, the human colony world became the most diplomatically courted planet in the galaxy, with ambassadors arriving bearing gifts and treaties rather than ultimatums and invasion fleets. Peace, it turned out, was considerably easier to maintain, when everyone understood that the alternative involved explaining to their constituents how they'd managed to lose a 4 million vessel armada to one mildly annoyed human. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about assumptions, though whether it was the right lesson remained a matter of philosophical debate among species that were still trying to understand what they'd witnessed. Some things, after all, were simply beyond the scope of conventional military analysis, or conventional anything, really.